Shabbat Shalom, everybody. This is Rabbi Stephen, Rav Shmuel with you. Um, Thank you for joining me for this week's 10-minute Torah, in which we start a new book. We start the book of Numbers, which is the fourth book of the Torah, and we're coming into the summer months, and we're going to become soon coming into the fall, and we will be starting a brand new year. Hard to believe, isn't it? But yes, we are coming up on Shavuot in just about 2 weeks. And it's going to be a lot of services, yes. Shavuot is a 2 day holiday versus the other two Shalosh Roglayim, the pilgrimage festivals of Pesach, which is 8 days in the diaspora, 7 days in Israel, and Sukkot, which is the same. Shavuot will be on June 5th and 6th. So we will have Shabbat on June 4th, Saturday. And then we'll have Shavuot 1 on Sunday and Shavuot 2 on Monday. And as usual, we're going to start services a little bit earlier at 9:30. It's typically a longer service because you have some extra things that typically happen, especially Sunday when we're going to have Yisker. Yeah, it's about 10 or 15 minutes, but again, a lot of times these special services tend to take a little bit longer, so I like to start them a little bit earlier. The other thing too, remember, the morning service is called Shachri. Now, we've talked about when the morning service ought to begin, according to proper halacha, and halacha is Jewish law, and it's from the Hebrew word holech, which means to go or to walk, because this is the proper way to go. Shulchan Aruch also comes, the Aruch part comes from the word go, and Shulchan is the table. And Shulchan Aruch is a compendium of all the various laws in Judaism, laws of Shabbat, laws of the week, laws of the various services, Hallel, Lulav and the Etrog, et cetera, et cetera. It's about 1,000 pages, so it's quite a big volume. Before we get into this week's Torah portion on Bamidbar, I want to kind of address the issue of mass killing in Texas. And a lot of people see the issues surrounding this, gun control as a political issue. From a rabbi standpoint, talking for myself, and I'm sure that a lot of rabbis are going to be talking about this to their congregation. We have the idea of Tekuah Nefesh, which means protection of life. That's ultimate, that's the concept. And how does that mesh with, the Second Amendment right to bear arms? Now, I'm not going to talk about that because that is political. What I am going to say is that, folks, we need to find a solution. These mass killings are happening more and more. Now, again, in Judaism, Tekuah HaNefesh, it would mandate finding a way to stop them. Now, of course, people say, well, we need to find ways to contain these. No, we need ways to fight, to end it, period. I mean, maybe that's a lofty goal one will never reach, but, in Judaism, that's what we go for because protection of life trumps everything. So there needs to be a solution. In Judaism as well, you respect the laws of the land. So there has to be some way to mesh people's individual rights with the rights of people to live. And that's what I'm going to say about that. So let's think about that. Let's think about the victims, more victims that have lost their lives. And let's talk to the proper people, and let's implore people to find a solution, a just, fair, equitable solution to this issue. Okay, let's talk about this week's portion. So we just left the book of Leviticus, and Leviticus has the word Levi. Of course, it addresses the idea of the priests and the ministers for the temple. And now the topic kind of turns a little bit. There are some more laws in Numbers, and there's some occurrences. There's some events that happen in Numbers. A lot of us are familiar with those events, and my thinking is that we'll address them when we get there. But now it's more kind of like turning to the life of the Israelites in the wilderness. And what we have is a census, Bamidbar. Bamidbar means in the wilderness, and it's taken from, as all names of the parshas and of the books are taken. They're taken from either the first or the second, in some cases, the third verse of that particular portion. And Bamidbar in the wilderness means, talks about how the Israelites are there, and it talks about them mustering. It talks about taking a census of the Israelites that are between the ages of 20 and 50. These are the people that are going to go fight. So we need to know, Moses needs to know, and everybody needs to know how many potential soldiers, warriors we have to fight the just fight. And they go through the various tribes. The princes take an accounting, and it comes out to about 603, I want to say 603,055. I'm doing this from memory, so you can look it up if you want and let me know if I'm wrong. But so 600,000 men between those ages. This is why we say how many Israelites were in the wilderness, probably about 2.5 million. If you figure that most of those guys had a wife, maybe a couple of kids, grandparents or older people above that age, younger babies are included in the children, you're going to have about 2.5 million people out there. Now, some people say, well, that's quite a lot of people to be marching through the wilderness. You're thinking, gosh, if they stood in a single file, they'd stretch from Egypt to the promised land, right? 2 million people. Some people say that's a little bit of an exaggeration. The word aluf or elef, which we've interpreted as thousand, some people say that when you see a number in the Torah, it may not be that. It may not be exactly that number. It may be amount. Like we say, a couple, or a few, or many, or gosh, about 10, 20. Is it 10 or 20? No, but it's probably about that number. So maybe it was a little bit lower than that. Maybe it was less than that. It's this idea of, do we take the Torah literally, or is it more conceptual and it's just making a point? Who knows? But they get an idea of how many people, because that's what a military commander needs to know. They need to know how many people, because if you're going to launch a campaign, you got to know what your strengths and what your weaknesses are. And they tend to muster, line up around the tabernacle. That's the other part of it. You had tribes, I think Judah and Reuben, and I think Dan were three of the head tribes, and they had two other tribes behind them. Like Judah had Issachar and Zebulun. Reuben had Shimon and I want to say Asher. So, again, you can look this up in the Torah. And then you had the three clans of the Levites also between the tribes and the Mishkan. And you had the Kohathites, the Merarites, and the Gershonites, and each one of them was responsible for various parts of the tabernacle. The Eitz Chaim Chumash makes the point that the Kohathites, the clan of Kohathites, and a clan is just a group of families, had the hardest job of all because they were transporting the holiest artifacts of the Mishkan. They were responsible for transporting the Holy of Holies, the altar, and it was important that the priests covered these artifacts, this furniture, because should a Kohathite look at it and see it, some people say that was death at the hand of heavens, for violating, having seen, this absolutely holy object, right? Nadab and Abihu were struck down by Hashem because they dared enter the Holy of Holies, the innermost sanctum of the Mishkan of the tabernacle, with the wrong incense, which they clearly, according to a lot of commentators, knew. So everybody was being very, very careful to show the respect due to these important artifacts that were used during the high priest officiation of various services. So this was a big responsibility. Now, the other two clans, and we get to that in the next portion, also the remainder, some of the curtains and some of the pegs, things like that, we'll come to that in the next portion. So, very intense portion. And, it sounds kind of boring. Okay, great. Well, we have to hear the numbers and we have to find out, who marched where. But a lot of people use a mystical interpretation. And I'll leave you with this. The number of Israelites that were counted between the ages of 20 and 50, the men that were available to go to war, is the same number of letters in the Torah. Think about that. See at services. Attend services next week as well. We got Friday night, Saturday. We have the 2 days of Shavuot. It's a lot, but I promise you it will be rewarding. Shabbat Shalom.